What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Grizzly Bear Blues Live. I'm your host, Parker Fleming, and GBB Live is the flagship podcast for Bluff City Media's Memphis Grizzlies coverage alongside Next Gen Podcast, Starting 5, Core 4, and then now Bluff City Bets. So make sure you subscribe wherever you get your audio content, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all that. We're also on YouTube if you want to watch us on the video. So subscribe there at the Bluff City Media YouTube page. And once again, I'm your host, Parker Fleming. We got a big-time guest. He is a senior NBA reporter over at Yahoo Sports. He is the author of the Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. Jake Fischer. Jake, what's happening, man?
What's going on, man? I appreciate the kind intro. And we got my own podcast, No Cap Room, on the Yahoo Sports Ball Don't Lie podcast feed that I got to record later on today. So if anyone wants some more of me talking into a microphone about basketball, we've got that coming every Thursday too. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. You know, I listened to one of y'all's first episodes of No Cap Room last week. Great stuff with you and Dan Devine. I'm surprised no one else came up with No Cap Room as a podcast name.
It wasn't our idea. We workshopped a bunch of random concepts, and then the good people at Yahoo's Audio Vision came up with that title. So there you go.
Oh yeah, it's some good stuff though. But you know, you're a busy guy, so you know, let's just go ahead and cut on to the chase here. You know, the Memphis Grizzlies are in this wild Western Conference, and they're probably in this boat along with every other team in the playoff mix, aside from Denver, where you can convince yourself that they're either going to go to the NBA Finals or they're going to get bounced in the first round. Just wild parity. People could say it's because of mediocrity, but I mean, there's just a bunch of good teams. Everyone's just beating up on each other. And I know the Grizzlies were very active at the trade deadline. I know you did a lot of reporting on that between Kevin Durant, OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges came out of nowhere. So just how do you, and obviously stuff at the deadline, it often gets revisited in the offseason. We saw that happen with the Mike Conley stuff a few years back as well in Memphis. So just how do you see the Grizzlies' playoff aspirations and how far they go? How does that affect their potential offseason plans? Because also, too, they try to upgrade at the 3 spot. It was pretty clear. And now Dillon Brooks is going to be entering unrestricted free agency. We don't know how much he's going to be for on the open market. So what do you see happening or what could happen given what happens in the postseason with Memphis?
Yeah, I mean, you said postseason aspirations, and I think the most important context here with Memphis is that this is a team that I think objectively has arrived a little bit ahead of schedule, right? Like no one was really expecting. I mean, look at where the Pelicans are. If you kind of want to compare similar timelines with the fact that Zion went number 1 in 2019, Ja went number 2. Just from that pure standpoint right there, the Pelicans are just as talented, let's say, but they just haven't been able to figure it out with Zion's health and other situations. Memphis they're pretty much locked into the 2 seed. This being the second straight year they'll have that number 2 position in the playoffs. There's been a switch from everything I've been under the impression of like, you know, last season it was a fun story. People around the Grizzlies were just excited and happy that things were being built in the right direction and they didn't want to mess things up. And there was all this talk last summer that how they had 3 first-round picks and they weren't going to take all 3 of these guys, and maybe they could use those picks to move up for Jaden Ivey. And that, you know, when I talked to Memphis people, that got, you know, cold water got poured all over that. But there was just like all this expectation from other front offices that Memphis, having, you know, risen up and being on the doorstep of being championship contenders, they were going to make a big swing last offseason. That just never came, right? So I think it's interesting that now this is absolutely a team that believes their championship window is now. Not that they're like Golden State, obviously, where their championship window is still open and now you have to make moves to try to capitalize on it before it closes. But you do kind of have to straddle this line of trying to make your window wider, if you will, while also not trying to tinker too much to the formula that has gotten you here to this point. So the fact that we saw them sniffing around on KD and Mikal and OG, I think the line that you drew with the Dylan Brooks part of the equation is an obvious one to really kind of look at and pay attention towards. I mean, Dylan has a lot of fans with Memphis, though, so I don't think it's a cut and dry scenario where like they're either keeping Dylan Brooks or are looking to move on from Dylan Brooks. Like I think there's, I mean, he is the identity of this team. Like as much as
Right.
Ja is the team's, leader, and I mean, I don't really want to get too much into all of his off court stuff, but when he was away from the team, there are a couple of things that I kept hearing from people around the situation. One of the most like consistent themes, and it rang pretty loud. It was just that the team and all these players, they like love and go to war for Ja. He is like a true leader in that regard. But in terms of like swagger and personality and identity leader, like that is Dylan Brooks. He is the.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny him and Draymond have this back and forth going because that's kind of the similarity that I see where Steph is kind of the guy who sets the tone in Golden State of being the pro who is consummate professional, leads by example, very humble, blah blah blah. Like, but Draymond is the kind of the teeth of everything there, right? So I don't know if you can just swap out Dylan Brooks just from a conceptual standpoint and bring in another guy and like still have that kind of gritty punch that's been a big key ingredient to the team moving forward. But I mean, they're a super frugal and pragmatic front office. They're always looking to turn over every stone, and they're very active in just exploring scenarios. So, I mean, they're going to have a lot to work with here. And I think what happens in the playoffs is going to, I think it's pretty cut and dry for most teams. Like whatever happens in the playoffs will end up determining a lot. But I think with Memphis, especially being that they've just the way the bracket is laying out for them. Like I was just talking to an executive in the Western Conference about this morning. Like to be in that 2-3 spot with Sacramento and to potentially dodge Phoenix, Golden State, and Denver, depending on how the standings fall. Like they have as good a route to get to the conference finals as any contending team in the league, maybe the best. And that's going to set the tone for expectations that will set the tone for a pretty important offseason.
Absolutely. And, the Dylan Brooks equation into all this is so interesting. It's an interesting dynamic because, on one hand, you're like, all right, look at the shooting splits, look at the shot selection and all that. And you can kind of make a compelling case for moving on from Dylan Brooks for a more efficient option at the three. But it's what you mentioned, that swagger and that intensity. I think that Portland game last week and in the Houston game a couple weeks ago, it's just kind of an example. Like you need a guy who frankly gives a shit every single night. And like they almost lost to a Portland team that really only had 2 NBA players playing with Shaedon Sharpe and Drew Eubanks. And then they almost lost at home against the Houston Rockets, who's just been all sorts of dysfunctional for the past 3 years. But having a guy like Dylan Brooks in there, he takes all these matchups personally. And you also kind of need that like mental X factor to put it nicely. Warriors have Draymond, Boston Celtics, they have Marcus Smart. You kind of need that mental X factor when you're trying to, go that far. You got to have guys with like mental toughness like Dylan Brooks. Like you said, he's the identity of this team. He's the swagger of this team. So it's very interesting, especially with all the names that were mentioned, because like it's obvious upgrades. I don't even want to get into Kevin Durant. It was like Kevin Durant wants Phoenix. He's getting Phoenix. Yeah. And then there's OG Anunoby. There's Mikal Bridges. And one thing I read from one of your reports is to keep Mikal Bridges in Memphis kind of like filed away. But we can kind of like with his play recently, we can kind of squash that now, right? Because like Brooklyn, there's no way they give him up, even if Memphis came out and said, hey, here's 5 first-round picks, including that Warriors pick next season, which, that could end up being a valuable asset for the Grizzlies' next quote-unquote cornerstone move. But I don't know, man. The Mikal Bridges stuff, it stings every single game. I see him just dropping 35, 40 points. It hurts, man.
Yeah, I probably wrote that from the perspective of Memphis I would suspect will call, right? They'll
Mm-hmm.
call. But to your point, everyone I've spoken to at Brooklyn, they are no intention and never did. And also, even with the Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith of it all, with like once that Kyrie trade went through and it was still kind of up in the air, like the Nets, from everything I heard, were not like they were not really engaging other teams trying to make some 3-team trade happen further and reroute those guys. Like they were listening. I mean, from multiple people I've talked to, both Dallas and Brooklyn have got pretty significant offers for Dorian Finney-Smith from contending teams too. So I'm sure they wanted to at least listen there, but like I don't believe there was like this giant, we're talking to Toronto down to the deadline here and figuring out the final steps before we close the door on making this just a 2-team trade. They really wanted all these guys back, and they wanted, at the time, they wanted to see what that unit could do with Kevin Durant until he decided, screw it, I want Phoenix. But regardless of KD, Mikal is someone that they view as the crown jewel for sure, and they think he's got even more potential than what he's showing right now, and that this is just kind of him getting his bearings, and with a full offseason and whatever iterations they're able to make with this roster around him, that like maybe they could see him take even a bigger leap. So any team that has wishful thinking of trying to pry Mikal Bridges from Brooklyn, I would say, yeah, that's probably just wishful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, yeah, the doors slammed shut on that. I mean, I think the only one of those three that it's realistic for Memphis in the offseason is OG Anunoby, just because, his expiring contract. They have Scotty Barnes. Their season's kind of gone a little haywire, but also, too, Fred VanVleet's unrestricted free agency. You have Tyus Jones. That's an expiring contract as well that can step in if VanVleet walks. I mean, that, and then I saw some different reports of Toronto's interest in Zaire Williams. I'm like, all right, that's the only trade package that would make sense if Memphis was trying to upgrade from the wing spot. But again, it's like one of those things like, would you rather upgrade from OG or from Dylan Brooks to OG Anunoby, or just keep Dylan Brooks and just sign to like a 2 or 3 year deal and just see what opens up down the road?
The other thing to keep in mind with OG Anunoby is a lot of his trade candidacy has been rooted in the fact that he won't be able to, or he wouldn't have been able to extend for more than that 120% maximum salary spike. And depending on how quickly that change in the new CBA, which it will be going up to 140%, depending on how quickly that'll be ratified, and different pieces of the CBA will go into effect at different stretches of the lifetime of that agreement. Like we'll have certainly parts of whatever the final terms are come into play immediately for this summer, for the next calendar year, starting June 30th at 6 p.m. Other things will trickle in later down the line, in 2 years and 3 years and stuff like that. Just like how lottery reform got passed in 2017 and it wasn't really instituted. It wasn't instituted until 2019 when Memphis obviously jumped up and got Ja. But depending on how that goes, if OG suddenly is able to sign a contract extension with Toronto that he wasn't capable of signing previously, I just wonder how that will impact things there. He certainly has been discussed as someone who is interested in having a bigger role outside of what his role is in Toronto, but a lot of that has also stemmed from the fact that he couldn't have signed a contract extension for the value he wants, or purportedly wants, until he became an unrestricted free agent in 2024. Same reason why DeJounte Murray got traded to Atlanta last summer, because the Spurs knew that he was going to want a higher salary figure than he was eligible of signing for until he became an unrestricted free agent. And then they clearly didn't think he was going to be worth that number, and they wanted to move him before he walked out for nothing. So I was absolutely looking at OG as a major primary trade candidate for this summer. Now we're kind of waiting and seeing how that CBA, change will impact things.
Absolutely. And, let's close on that CBA talk. I mean, I'm just going to highlight a couple of the things from the new CBA. The second tax apron, which I've already seen people call the super tax, the third two-way contract, the second round exception, that veteran extension limit going from 120 to 140%. I mean, for a team like the Memphis Grizzlies, who, stuff's about to get expensive with Ja's extension coming up, Desmond Bane likely getting a high extension as well, and just this team getting more and more expensive. How do you see this new CBA impacting a team like the Memphis Grizzlies in their championship window into the mid 2020s?
Yeah, we still need to understand a lot more of the specifics. I went to the union on Tuesday. I was there for Wolves shoot around, and I was talking to some people around the Players Association, and like they kept saying, wait till the term sheet goes out, then we'll be able to walk you through it in full detail and all that type of stuff. But just generally speaking, without getting into the nitty gritty of it all, like it's pretty clear that there's going to be benefits for teams like Memphis who have a lot of homegrown talent and being able to retain those players and have there be some tax benefits, or at least not as costly of a tax punishment for drafting well and being able to re-sign guys that you have brought into your program. And so obviously Memphis has done that so far super exceptionally with Ja Jaren and Desmond Bane. And Santi Aldama has come a long way in this absence for Steven Adams. I know there's a lot of support down there for Jake LaRavia and David Roddy. Like and Memphis loves the draft. Like they clearly want to take swings and they take guys higher than they think other teams, or they take guys regardless of where they think, that they're higher on guys like Jake LaRavia than other teams or David Roddy than other teams. Like they're just going and getting their guy because they like having, rookies on rookie scale contracts, and players that they think are kind of like development projects, or not like a total project in that sense of the word, but guys that they can grow alongside this winning formula they already have. So if that's an identity of that front office that I think will ultimately continue to get rewarded under the new CBA structure, depending again on the specifics that we're still kind of waiting to learn more about.
Absolutely. And Jake, we'll go ahead and wrap up the show here. If there's anything else you want to add, feel free, and then just go ahead and plug in your stuff, man. I appreciate you coming on the show this week.
You got it. Thanks for having me. No, I'm excited to see Memphis in the playoffs. I think, a lot of teams around the league talk about Memphis as having maybe a louder bark than their bite, and this will be the chance for Memphis to really prove it this spring. Thanks for having me, man. It's been a really interesting team to follow. We're gonna probably be covering them a lot at Yahoo, I would expect, both on the website at Yahoo Sports and on our podcast network, the Ball Don't Lie channel. We've got a show on Mondays with Vince Goodwill. He has a rotating panel of guests that he's bringing through. And then myself and Dan Devine, we have No Cap Room on Thursdays, which, I'm about to record right now.
Awesome. Yeah, so we'll let you get to that. I appreciate you coming on. Make sure you follow him on Twitter for all his great basketball coverage, just great reporting. Him, Dan, Vince are all doing a great job at Yahoo Sports. You can follow me on Twitter at Paca_Flocka. Make sure you follow all of our stuff over at BCM Grizzlies, and go to all of our work over at bluffcitymedia.co and become a Bluff City Media Insider today for just $5 a month. And make sure you're subscribing to all of our YouTube channels, Spotify channels, all that. So with that, we'll see you next week. It'll be playoff time.